Planning Committee today. My name is Councillor Keith Driver, and I'm Chair of the Planning Committee, and I shall be chairing the meeting. There's a few matters of housekeeping. Action in event of emergency. There is no practice alarms planned for this meeting, so if an alarm sounds, please evacuate the City Hall by going down the main staircase and going out where the War Memorial in front of the City Hall. This meeting is being live streamed to the Council YouTube pages that will be available after the meeting. Please, for the speakers, use microphones at all times and speak directly into the microphone, and with participation, please mute the microphones when not speaking. Introductions, we'll go around the table to say who we are so everyone knows who the members are, who the Planning Committee are and stuff. So on my left is...
Good morning, I'm Councillor Mike Sands.
Councillor Emma Hampton.
Good morning, Councillor Ian Stuteley.
Hi, Councillor Ash Haynes.
Good morning, Councillor Jenny Knight.
Good morning, Councillor Richard Laws.
Good morning, Councillor Kevin Maguire, subbing for Colby Harper.
Good morning, Councillor Chris Smith.
Morning, Councillor Charlie Kane.
Hello, Councillor Julie Young.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you. I'm Sarah Ashurst, Head of Planning and Regulatory Services.
Good morning, I'm David Parkin. I'm the Development Manager for the City Council.
Hi, I'm Robert Webb, Senior Planner for the City Council.
Leonie Bowett, Senior Committee Officer.
Thank you all for that. Members of the committee may use electrical devices to access the meeting papers, and visitors are welcome to use their mobile phones and other devices, including cameras. But please use them discreetly, set them to silent, and do not voice or camera flash functions. We'll have a short break at 12 o'clock, and between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock, there's any business left to be resolved. Thank you. We'll move on now to the committee papers, and first thing on the agenda is apologies for absence.
We've received apologies from Councillors Fox, Harper and Lubbock. Councillor Maguire is acting as Councillor Harper's substitute, and Councillor Young is acting as Councillor Fox's substitute, and Councillor Harper has sent apologies as she is predetermined on the first item.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest, anyone? Richard.
Thank you, Chair. I have an interest in item 4.1, a pecuniary interest as a student landlord myself. So I will, after this, after we've approved the minutes, leave the meeting for the duration of that item and won't take part or vote on it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you.
I would just like to have it on record, sorry, that sounds echoey, that I do work for the university, UEA, but I don't feel I'm predetermined or have any outcome of this application won't affect my role.
Brilliant, thank you. Emma?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that as a cabinet member and given this kind of scale of one of these applications, I sought some advice about whether that means I'm predetermined or otherwise, and I'm not. I've come to this with a completely open mind and have not engaged on this application in any way, but would make me predetermined.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Minutes of the last meetings. Have we got them? Okay, let me click to the next meeting. And we'll move on to planning applications now, which is 4.1. And Richard, you've declared an interest, so you will have to leave. Thank you. Thank you. For our case officer to go through it, Robert. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. The application before us is application reference 24/00012/F, and it's at Orford House, Orford Place, Norwich, more commonly known as the former Debenhams building. And the proposal is the demolition of the existing building to the ground floor level and redevelopment to provide purpose-built student accommodation of 377 bed spaces and some ground floor and lower ground commercial spaces, retail spaces, approximately 1,500 square meters of space. And then there's also some internal and external amenity spaces that go along with the purpose-built student accommodation. Just before I kind of get into the main presentation, there are some updates to let you know about. On page 5 of the report, where it states that the report is from the Executive Director of Climate and Environment, that should state the report is from the Head of Planning and Regulatory Services. On paragraph 65, page 21 of the report, it states that the University of East Anglia objects due to a lack of engagement with the university. The applicant has asked me to point out that they did make contact with University of East Anglia. They contacted the Vice Chancellor and President in November 2024, and they did receive a response at that time, and the response did state that the UEA was unable to support the application, but we just wanted to clarify that. The final update is that there have been a couple of updates to the wording of the text of the report. These are in paragraph 81 and also paragraph 169. I'm not going to read out all the exact wording, but basically it just provides additional clarity around the level of heritage impact and the overall level of heritage impact, and explains how we have weighed that in the balance in coming to the judgment and the recommendation, which is to approve planning permission. So that concludes the update. So now I can move on to take you through the application itself. So the application site boundary is there with the red line. You can see it's drawn tightly around the former Debenhams building. Although you should note it doesn't include numbers 1 and 3 Brigg Street. They lie outside of the application site. So the red line has boundaries on Orford Place, Red Lion Street, Rampant Horse Street, and Brigg Street. And there's a photo showing the view from the Rampant Horse Street frontages and the Red Lion Street frontage, the view from Westlegate. I'm sure many will be familiar with. That's a view taken from Castle Meadow, looking at the Red Lion Street frontage, and Orford Street is just on the right-hand side. Orford Place, I should say. That's a view looking down Orford Place, taken from Red Lion Street, with the building on the left-hand side. That's a view looking down from kind of Haymarket towards Brigg Street, and the building itself is the one that's in that position there. Another view taken from Brigg Street, looking down Orford Place, and this building in the foreground is not part of the application site, but the building that you can see further down Orford Place, that is part of the former Debenhams, and therefore that is part of the application. Then that's a view looking down Rampant Horse Street. You've got Marks and Spencer's on the right-hand side, and then the Debenhams building on the left-hand side of Rampant Horse Street. And then this shows the existing site plan. So the entire site is covered in building as it stands at the moment. And you might wish to note that there's quite a deep floor plate to the building. There are windows on all of the external sides of the building, but it has got quite a deep floor plate. So that's the proposed site plan. So it's effectively building a new building, pretty much on exactly the same footprint as the existing building. And now I'm going to take you through some existing and proposed elevations. So that's the existing Red Lion Street elevation. And that's the proposed development. You can see on the ground floor, there would be a re-provision of retail space up until that point there. And then on the right-hand side, you've got, this is the entrance to the student accommodation. And this is kind of a lobby area for the student and some amenity space seating area for them. All the floors above the ground floor in that image are student bedrooms primarily, and communal kitchens and so on. That's the Rampant Horse Street as it is now. And that's Rampant Horse Street as proposed. So that's the elevation that would face Marks and Spencer's. And then that's Brigg Street as it currently appears. And that's the proposal. And you can see that the buildings in white here, they stay as they are because they're outside of the application site. And then Orford Place is currently looking like that. And the application proposes to have that as the elevation facing Orford Place. This is probably the part of the site that sees the bigger increase in height in terms of building, because currently it's 3-story in this area, and that's going up to 5. And then behind that there would be some additional stories. And then this is a tall section of the building as well, which is 8 stories in total. So this is the proposed ground floor. You've got Red Lion Street is along the top of this plan, and where the cursor is now is the entrance to the student accommodation. There is, and also I should say, so you've got a lobby area for the student accommodation here. You've got some post room facilities, office there. You've got communal space for the students to use that kind of goes into the heart of the building. There is a roof light above this space. You've also then got an entrance here on Orford Place that takes students into the area where the cycle storage is, which is located in that location. And then we've got bin storage for the student accommodation in this position here. And we've got sort of bin storage for the retail units and stair cores, etc. in these locations. On the ground floor, there are 3 retail units. So this is the largest one, which is on the corner of Red Lion Street and Rampant Horse Street. So the corner sort of facing and the side of the building facing Marks and Spencer's. Then you've also got another retail unit on this corner of the building on the Brigg Street and Rampant Horse Street corner. You've also got an entrance in this location to a further commercial unit, which is in the basement. And there is a small shop unit that is located on Brigg Street, and that is in that position there. So this is the basement or lower ground floor. This is a large commercial space that is accessed from Brigg Street down these stairs, and also there's a lift that can take you down to the basement level. There is further student amenity space in the basement. You've got a gym and a cinema room, as well as quite a large communal living area. And then there's further space in the basement for plant and equipment related to the building. And this is the proposed first floor, which shows where the student accommodation will be located. This is how the majority of the floors look. So what they're actually doing is, or proposing to do, is to have a courtyard that would run through the centre of this new building. So that would help to provide natural light into the core, and therefore you have a number of rooms that are kind of centered around facing towards that courtyard area, which is quite large in size. And then a number of the other student bedrooms face outwards towards the streets surrounding the building. So that's one of the reasons why the applicant has sort of sought to build a new building, basically, because it's quite difficult to convert the existing building into a residential or student accommodation because of the fact that it doesn't have a kind of a light well or a courtyard within it. So it is more difficult to bring natural light into the building, as it currently is anyway. So I'm not going to show you every single floor because I think it's the next 5 floors are all pretty much identical to this. I should point out that there are some of the rooms are kind of what they call studios, where they're more self-contained, and the rooms would have small kitchen areas, ensuite bathrooms, and kind of everything you would need to kind of cook for yourself, etc. And then there's other rooms that are known as clusters, which are, for example, they're the pale, sorry, they're the darker blue ones actually, which are, so for example, in this area, so those cluster rooms share communal kitchens and living areas, and there's a number of those that are sort of on each floor as well. So now taking you up to the 5th floor, because as I say, floors 1 to 4 all look pretty much like the one I just showed you. The 5th floor has a slightly reduced footprint because they're more recessed from the outer walls of the building. Key thing to show you here is that there's a communal living area up on this floor, and there's also a roof terrace available for the students to have some outside amenity space and some space for some planting. And then the 6th floor is the story above that. So yeah, similar plan, but it just shows the accommodation that's up on the 6th floor. This is the top floor of student accommodation. And then the roof plan as proposed, you can see quite large areas of green roofs, sedum planting, and also significant areas of solar panels to help with the energy efficiency of the building and renewable energy provision. And now I'm going to take you through some visualizations, because we asked, so the site is within the city centre conservation area. The building itself is not listed, but is considered to be a non-designated heritage asset. So it means it has some local heritage significance. I should say that the building was completed in 1956. Construction started in 1953, and it was originally opened by Curls as a department store. Later on in 1973, I think Debenhams acquired the whole building, and since 1973 it was a Debenhams store until it closed in May 2021. But the location is sensitive. It is in the heart of the city centre. It's a conservation area. There are a number of important heritage assets that are all in close proximity, most notably Norwich Castle, St Peter Mancroft Church and St Stephen's Church, which are all Grade 1 listed. There are also a number of Grade 2 star and Grade 2 listed buildings that are kind of in proximity as well. So, sorry, I didn't mean to move that on. What we asked the applicant to do was to provide some visualizations and verified views so we can assess the impact of this proposal on the townscape. So the first image I'm showing you is from St Stephen's Roundabout, and the key thing to note is that, so the top image is as existing, and you might just be able to make out, you can see the top of the Norwich Cathedral spire where that cursor is there. I'll just move it out of the way. It's a bit clearer to see when you're sort of standing there in person. We were kind of keen to ensure that that view was retained. So and now when the application was originally submitted, there were an additional 2 stories on top of this. So it did block the view of the cathedral spire. We've through negotiations with the applicant, the development was reduced by 2 stories. So that this image shows that you can kind of see on the bottom image, which is where the proposed development is, you maintain that view of the cathedral spire. You might just be able to make out a white sort of building above the cursor there. That's the proposed flats, student flats. Yeah, I can zoom in on that if that helps. Yeah, that's better. So you can just make out the proposed development there, and you can see the spire just above the cursor. If I zoom in on the same area, so you can, with the existing, just so you can see that. You'll see, you can already see the top of the Debenhams building as well in this image, just rising above some of the other buildings in the foreground. So there isn't really a significant change from this vantage point. So now moving on to the view from St Stephen's Street. Apologies, the images are slightly washed out, but again, in all of these images, the top image is the existing view and the bottom image is the proposed with the new development sort of imposed onto the image. So you can just make out the top of the Debenhams building above Marks and Spencer's where the cursor is there. Again, I'll just zoom in on that. So that's the current Debenhams building, just poking up above Marks and Spencer's. And then if I look at the same position, you can see that's the proposed development. So from this vantage point, it's not a huge difference, but the new development would be slightly taller than the existing one. So that's another view looking down Rampant Horse Street. You've got subway on the left-hand side, St Stephen's Church on the right-hand side, and then again top image is as existing, and then the bottom image is the proposed development, and that's how that frontage would appear, which faces M&S. So you have a setback at the top with some additional levels of accommodation, and that's where the roof terrace is as well in that location there. So that's where that's positioned. This is a view taken from the Castle Mound. Currently, that's what the building looks like. So yeah, I don't think this is probably not the best frontage of the existing building. It's a bit of a higgledy-piggledy sort of elevation with a number of different projections, some of which are kind of clad in sort of modern materials that aren't that sympathetic to the conservation area. I think this is actually an area where the proposal will lead to some improvement, because if you look at the proposed development, it's a more coherent building. The materials are sympathetic to the character of the conservation area, and some of the design details also are kind of more sympathetic than what is there with some of the modern additions to the existing building, where it's been kind of extended in a fairly piecemeal fashion. This is the view, so looking from Castle Meadow. You've got the Bell pub on the left-hand side of the photos, and again, that's the existing what you see at the moment, and then this is the proposed development seen from that vantage point. And again, it gives you an idea of some of the level of detailing that the applicant has proposed, which has been something that we've kind of negotiated through the planning process with them to try and get some facades and sort of design quality and materials that are as sympathetic as possible to the surrounding buildings and quality of the built environment that we already have here. So this is more of an aerial view, which is kind of a similar position to what you would see from the top of the battlements on Norwich Castle. Again, it shows that view that we sort of looked at beforehand, but from a more elevated level. So yeah, top view, you can kind of see the existing building, which has a good frontage facing Red Lion Street, but as you can see, facing Orford Place, and when viewed from Norwich Castle, it's actually the current building is possibly not, you know, as attractive from that vantage point, and this is what the new development would look like. And I'll zoom in on those so that's as currently seen. And that's as proposed. So it's worth pointing out that the building drops down quite significantly on Orford Place, but does rise up on this corner with Red Lion Street. And that, I think it's also worth pointing out that the rationale behind the kind of design of the building is also something that we worked with the applicant through pre-application discussions. So it was sort of widely felt that it would be a good idea to break the building down into kind of a series of different buildings in a way, in terms of having different materials on different parts of the building, different parts of the building having different heights to them, setback as well, to kind of help break up the massing and reduce the impact of the scale. So the building is made up of a number of different sections of varying height, and also features recessed stories at the upper level to help reduce the impact of the scale of the building when viewed from street level in particular. And then the view from the corner of Red Lion Street and Rampant Horse Street, looking from Westlegate direction. So M&S building is on the left-hand side, and again, that's the proposed and existing elevations and sort of visualizations. And we've also got the view from Orford Hill, and you can just make out behind the tree that that's the proposed building in the background there, and it's a bit more difficult to see. I'll zoom in on that just to see if that helps. And again, when that tree, during summertime, you're not going to see too much from this position, or as much, but that's the existing. And that's the proposed. And then one final visualization to show you, that is, I don't have the existing view, but that's the view looking down Red Lion Street with Orford Place on the right hand side. And then that's how the building would appear from that vantage point. So to take you through the kind of the main issues now with the application. So we have received a number of objections. They're all detailed within the committee report. But the topics on which people have objected are heritage impacts through the loss of the existing Debenhams building. As I said, it's considered to be a non-designated heritage asset. Objectors on those grounds include a conservation officer within Norwich City Council. The concerns have been raised by Historic England and also a couple of heritage bodies, including the 20th Century Society and SAVE. Yeah, they are concerned about the impact of the loss of this building, which they feel contributes to the significance of the conservation area, and also for its own sake in terms of as a heritage asset, albeit a local level one. But that's a concern that has been raised. Other concerns have been raised about the design of the proposed building. Some people are concerned about that it wouldn't integrate well within the surrounding cityscape. There are some concerns on environmental grounds about demolishing the building. So some people are concerned about the embodied carbon that would be released through demolishing the building and would prefer to see the building repurposed and reused and kept. Concerns about impacts on local businesses during demolition and construction phases. Concern has been raised that there is no need for further purpose-built student accommodation in Norwich, including, and I think we might be hearing from somebody from the University of East Anglia today that I think they have objected to this. Concerns about amenity levels for the future occupiers, so the students, concerns that it wouldn't be provide a high standard of living, and finally some concerns about some of the transport impacts and whether there's sufficient cycle storage for the development. So yeah, just to sort of take you through our position as planning officers on all of these matters, they are set out in detail in the report. In terms of the heritage impact, we do acknowledge that there would be some heritage impact through the loss of the existing building. We do acknowledge it makes a contribution to the built environment as it currently is. However, it's not a listed building. It has been empty. It's been disused for approaching 5 years now, and that's having a negative impact on the city centre in terms of the perception of the city, but also, it's just not making good use of a very important site right in the heart of Norwich city centre. So what we've tried to do is work hard to kind of agree with the applicant and work with them to come up with what we believe is a good quality design for a replacement building. And on the basis of a lot of the benefits that this proposal is going to bring, we think that the heritage impacts are justified in this instance. The heritage impacts are quantified as less than substantial harm at the moderate level. So planning policy tells us, national planning policy and local planning policy tells us that in those situations we have to weigh the planning benefits against the heritage harm, and it's our view that the planning benefits outweigh the heritage impacts and heritage harm in this case. Concerns regarding the design of the proposed building. Hopefully the visualizations I've shown you give you the confidence that this is actually a very well designed building that will sit comfortably in the heart of Norwich city centre and actually will contribute a new level of architectural quality and from some vantage points, particularly Norwich Castle, I think it's actually an improvement over the current building that's on the site. So there is the architect has done a good job, I think, in terms of design. So I think we feel as planners that actually the design is very good. The environmental concerns for demolishing the building, we recognise that. We would prefer to see the existing building retained and repurposed, but we have required the applicants to do a very thorough examination of alternative proposals which would allow the building to be kept. They've looked at, could it be converted for student accommodation? Could it be converted for residential accommodation? Could it be retained solely for retail? Could it be used as offices? Could it be used as a mixture of all these things? Unfortunately, because of the design of the building and the dated layout of it, the fact it's got very tall floor to ceiling heights and it's got a very deep floor plate with little natural light going into it, it just doesn't convert easily to any of these uses. And then some of the uses there isn't much demand for, so it's unlikely that the building's ever going to be reused solely for retail again in the future. There just isn't the demand for that currently. Likewise, it's unlikely that the whole building, that there would be a demand to use that for offices. So we feel that the case has been proven that, and we've accepted the case that it's very difficult to convert this building in a way that's financially viable for a future use. We have also, got independent commercial surveyors to kind of verify the applicant's position, and they do back that up, that the existing building, you might be able to let the ground floor and possibly the first floor for retail, but the other floors are likely to be redundant unless you were to convert them somehow. But as I said, it's very difficult to convert them. So we are comfortable that the case for demolishing this building has been proven. Concerns around impacts on local businesses through demolition and construction, of course, we take that very seriously. We're working with colleagues at Local Highway Authority and Environmental Protection to sort of make sure that those impacts would be managed in a very careful way. The applicant has submitted an outline demolition and construction management plan that shows how the development would be phased and to minimise impacts on the surrounding streets as much as possible. I think the other thing to say is that construction impacts in itself is not something that we would attach significant weight to in a decision-making process, because there are ways of managing those impacts, but there are conditions recommended to manage those impacts, and we have got a good level of information to see that it can be done in a way that that would not cause serious disruption to the city centre, but it is acknowledged that there would be some disruption. Regarding the need for further purpose-built student accommodation, we do acknowledge the representations that have been made by University of East Anglia, but I think I'd like to point out that's only one of the universities. We also have Norwich University of Arts. They haven't responded to the application, but they are a growing university that is based within the city centre, and this development could help to meet their future growth needs. We also have some fairly recent evidence based that a study that was commissioned by the City Council to understand future need for purpose-built student accommodation. And that shows that student numbers are likely to grow year on year, probably by around about 400 additional students year on year up until 2038, I think, which was the sort of timescale that the study was looking at. So we are going to need more student bed spaces, even though it might not feel like it right at the moment. We accept that at the moment, UEA does have voids on its campus, and not all of the student accommodation buildings within the city centre are fully occupied, as we understand it. But that's the current position, and our position is that this site forms part of the planning pipeline that will help to deliver and meet future needs and future growth of students that we are going to need to accommodate, and the city centre is a good place to have students living. Finally, concerns about amenity levels for future occupiers. I mean, there are some fairly generous communal lounges, communal living areas that I've shown. There's a gym, there's a cinema room, there's a roof terrace. The rooms all meet good practice guidelines in terms of internal space. So all the bedrooms are relatively generous for student accommodation. So yeah, we're satisfied that the amenity levels for the occupiers of the student accommodation would be good. And finally, in terms of transport impacts, it's a highly sustainable site. You've got multiple bus routes from the doorstep of the building, but also it's on a main bus route to the University of East Anglia. It's within walking distance of sites operated by University of Arts, and there's also the level of cycle storage that's being proposed is, if anything, it's a bit more than what we've had on other student blocks in the city centre. So I think it's around 30% level of cycle storage per occupier, which we think is sufficient because not everybody will use a bike. So so we're happy with that. The other factor that's sort of weighing in our judgment and the planning balance judgment that we have to make is that there currently is not we cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply in the Norwich policy area. So in such instances, national planning policy tells us that unless there are very strong reasons to refuse a planning application, we should approve it. And so to help meet that housing need, I think I've put it, there's a figure in the report somewhere, but I think this would help to meet the equivalent of around almost 300 new homes. So it will make a significant contribution towards helping to meet the city's housing need, part of which is student accommodation. But that's an important thing, that 5-year housing land supply. We haven't got one at the moment. So in such instances, government requires us to, unless there are very strong reasons, government requires us to kind of have a presumption in favour of granting planning permission, and we have to have regard to that as a planning authority. So moving on to the benefits then, and these are all kind of set out on page 39 of the committee report in paragraph 173, but I wanted to reiterate them. So the planning benefits are that it's going to be, if approved, this would be a redevelopment of a brownfield site that's been redundant since 2021. And it will result in the regeneration of a building that's currently having a negative impact on the city centre as a retail and leisure destination, and is contributing to a negative perception of Norwich city centre. So this is a building that we need to do something with. Delivery of 377 student rooms in a sustainable city centre location, contributing to the success of Norwich as a key destination for undergraduates, with associated economic benefits for the city centre in terms of the spend that the students will bring to the city centre, supporting local businesses and the wider city. This would contribute an equivalent to 295 new dwellings to help meet the housing land supply deficit in the Greater Norwich policy area. It potentially might help free up market housing, which is otherwise being occupied by students, to enable individuals and families to occupy those as general needs housing. It will re-provide almost 1,500 square metres of commercial and retail floor space of a size that are more likely to be let in the current kind of retail climate. So they're smaller units that there's more of a demand for. There isn't really a demand for the big department store buildings anymore, when Norwich is already well represented by the big department store players. There's economic benefits through the creation of jobs, both through the construction phases, but also operational phases of both the commercial units and the student accommodation. And a delivery of a high quality design, which we consider is sympathetic to the character of the conservation area and will integrate well within the surrounding cityscape. And also, whilst we acknowledge there is some harm environmentally from demolishing the existing building, this building is going to target a BREEAM very good rating. There's going to be ecological enhancements through additional planting and biodiversity enhancements that we can incorporate as part of a new development. And as you've seen, green roofs have been incorporated and solar panels, along with it would be a very energy efficient building. So although there would be a cost to the environment whilst the building is being constructed, once it's operational, it would be more efficient than the existing building that's on site, and eventually would, be a very sustainable development. I'll touch on affordable housing. So the Greater Norwich local plan policy does now require student accommodation to make an affordable housing contribution. So the applicant has told us that the viability is challenging with this site, so they have submitted a viability appraisal. That viability appraisal demonstrates that it's not possible to make an affordable housing contribution, unfortunately. We have had that verified. We commissioned our own viability review to make sure that the figures all stack up and the position is correct. And the position from our consultant was that they agreed with the applicant's consultant that viability is very challenging, as it is on a number of sites in Norwich at the moment, and therefore it's not possible to make an affordable housing contribution. So instead of that, what we are recommending is that we have a clause within a legal agreement attached to the planning application, which requires viability to be reviewed in the future if the economic conditions improve, and so we can capture an affordable housing contribution if things improve before the building actually is completed. So in conclusion then, for all the reasons I've explained, our recommendation is to approve this planning application and grant planning permission subject to the completion of a satisfactory legal agreement to include the provision of that affordable housing viability review that I mentioned, and also a contribution towards the green infrastructure and recreational mitigations tariff, and also subject to purchase of nutrient neutrality mitigation. The applicant is looking to purchase credits from Norfolk Environmental Credits. So correct, yeah, Norfolk Environmental Credits, NEC, to offset the nutrient impacts from the development, and they have been allocated credits by the scheme, and if successful if members are minded to approve application, my understanding is they will purchase those credits prior to permission being granted. And also subject to the conditions that are all set out in the report. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Robert. We'll move on now. We've got two speakers who speak in objection for the application, and we've also got a statement on behalf of residents, which will be read out by one of the officers after the two speakers. So the first one is Stephen Wells. If you come to the desk, Steve, and you have 3 minutes. Is there a microphone on that one? Yes.
Yeah, there is. Okay, thank you, everyone. So I'm going to go through a number of points as quickly as I can in the 3 minutes that I've got. So there's been no meaningful engagement undertaken with UEA as the largest higher education institution in Norwich by the applicant team prior to or during the determination of the planning application. The LPA evidence base in the form of its now adopted SPD, which was adopted in September 2025, confirms an oversupply of PBSA within the city, and therefore the proposal should be refused in accordance with the policy 5 of the Greater Norwich Local Plan. The proposed development is not meeting a justified need, would provide oversupply in an already oversaturated PBSA market, hence the void UEA currently has across its current stock, which is 7%. The current void within PBSAs, we believe, is around 10% currently. The UEA Strategy 2030 sees a small increase in student numbers to circa 20,000, but the changes to student requirements such as commuter and students staying at home is on the increase. The SPD is recent, up-to-date planning policy and forms part of the council's development plan, and therefore should be given maximum weight in any decision making. We urge this committee not to go against and ignore such an up-to-date planning policy. The council only adopted a few months ago, and on the first application for a PBSA that comes before them, we therefore contend that the SPD weights heavily against the scheme, both as a development plan policy and as a material consideration capable of significant weight in directing refusal of the scheme. Housing land supply deficiency is marginal below the 5 years required at 4.85 years. Whilst numerically this scheme delivers housing units, it does nothing to meet the local housing need. As this, the council's own evidence in the form of the adopted SPD already concludes an oversupply of PBSA in the marketplace. And for this reason, the university would invite members of the committee to place limited weight on the benefits. We would conclude that if permitted, based on council's recently adopted SPD, and for the reasons raised by the council's own conservation team in Historic England, the scheme would have adverse effect on the PBSA market in Norwich during the viability to deliver and fill voids on campus at UEA. With the consequential economic, social disbenefits this would have on the Greater Norwich and the region, Permitting this scheme would have an adverse impact environmentally, economically and socially, which would significantly and demonstrably outweigh any benefits associated with the scheme. Therefore, when taken as a whole with the development plan and the National Planning Policy Framework, this would not result in substantial development and should be refused. Lack of engagement within the university, paragraph 101 of the officer's report, is weak, given the SPD requirement is for applicants to demonstrate meaningful engagement with UEA and Norwich University Arts and support provided from these institutions, nor is this sufficient to pass the criteria within the council's own SPD. The LPA needs to enforce this requirement at meaningful engagement as students will come from UEA and Norwich University Arts. There's also no evidence of any engagement with Norwich University Arts within the paperwork. Paragraph 104 of the officer's report, seeking to justify need on the basis of the SPD figures, suggesting an increase in need of 944 further bed spaces by 2038-2039. This is a long time away in a challenging and changing higher education sector with falling demographics of 18-year-olds from 2030. Furthermore, there are already sufficient consents available to meet this, principally bringing back online UEA's iconic ziggurats and the Blackdale Phase 2 scheme, which is already consented. Council's own evidence, the SPD, suggests approving more PBSA schemes now is on a trajectory of over-provision of 2,033 bed spaces by 2038-39, with significant negative impact, negative economic and social consequences this would have for the city and the university, with such a significant oversaturation and resultant impact on the student experience. My final point, UEA is a campus university, and the importance of the original concept of living and learning in a parkland setting and how this adds to the student experience. This is being eroded by ongoing approvals of city centre PBSA schemes, which is threatening the long-term viability of a campus model for the University of East Anglia, with the associated negative economic and social effects arising from further voids in the university accommodation. I strongly recommend the committee to refuse the application. There is clearly no demand.
We also have Michael Jordan.
Okay. Hopefully the officer's report has included the Norwich Society's comments in full at paragraphs 48 to 50. So in the limited time I have, I'd just like to emphasise 3 points. Firstly, the Norwich Society doesn't share the view of others, including your own conservation staff, that demolition of the Debenhams building should be opposed in principle. We see no viable long-term future for this building without extensive internal demolition, and the current facades are not remotely of a quality that would require their attention. So we are open to the principle of demolition whenever an acceptable replacement is found and is guaranteed to be implemented. Our objection today is that an acceptable replacement is not yet before us, nor is it certain to be built out. I can't be the only person in the room today who regrets that purpose-built student accommodation has been just about the only game in town over the last decade. The Society has been saying for some time now that this is a boom which ultimately will burst. And the Council's very valuable recent research draws attention to the situation we now find ourselves in. There are at least 2 undesirable outcomes for Norwich at the present time. We are seeing buildings that have been completed but are under-occupied and are yet ill-suited to adaptation for other residential use. And we now have a number of sites blighted by ambitions for further student accommodation that will never be implemented. The Society shares everybody's concerns about the current derelict state of this key city centre site, but it's important to recognise that it is far from certain that any permission you grant today will actually be implemented in the present climate. What the granting of planning permission today will certainly do is establish an expectation that any future revised or alternative proposals for this site will at least match the scale of these current plans. The applicants have advanced no compelling urban design or heritage rationale for constructing above the scale of the current bulky building in this extremely sensitive setting. Instead, they plead only a viability need for doing so, which is itself rather telling in the current environment. There's much in this report that we agree with. The Norwich Society, however, strongly believes that the report significantly understates the harm that will arise from adding further stories to the current height of the building, especially when this is located on its most sensitive northern flank. A respectful development would set out to rectify the harm which the current building's looming presence does on Orford Place, not exploit that precedent and exacerbate it with additional height. So for these reasons, the Society urges you not to grant planning permission today. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. This is a statement on behalf of Gabriella Costa, a member of the public. Gabriella makes the following statement. I'm born and bred in Norfolk. The Debenhams building is part of the furniture of Norwich city centre, and I think the proposed plans to demolish and rebuild into student flats should be refused for the following reasons. The building is a part of Norwich's city centre history and is beautifully in keeping with the surrounding architecture. The building does not appear to be in a state where it requires demolition. I object to the use of this building being changed to residential flats, as it will drastically change the feel of the city centre, setting a precedent for other buildings to be turned into accommodation. Where does this leave the retail sector in Norwich in the future? We need accommodation, of course, but the heart of the city isn't the right place. Following this, it causes a loss of employment, as without so much retail space, it can't provide the same level of employment as Debenhams did. I think other uses should be explored. Norwich city centre doesn't compete with other cities when it comes to art and culture. The space could be used as a versatile space of exhibitions, talks, shops, installations, much like Factory International in Manchester, the Young V&A in London, or Wake the Tiger in Bristol. A space where there are changing activities and events that educate and keep people and families coming back, offering something different than just shops and restaurants. You might say in response to this that we have the Forum, but the Forum can only hold small and temporary events and exhibitions of minimal cultural significance. None of these reasons will necessarily demonstrate that the proposed plans go against planning policy, but put planning policy aside and instead use common sense and vision. Taking down an already beautiful building, well established in the heart of Norwich city centre, and replacing it with a vaguely similar version of no architectural significance, just for flats, shows no vision or plans for this city. Don't rush for the sake of filling a void. Make sure this is the right choice for generations to come.
Thank you, Roy.
Just me, I'm afraid. Just me, yes. Thank you. Chair, members of the committee, thank you. My name is Matt Horn and I'm the Development Director of Orford House Developments. I'll be brief because you already have a comprehensive officers report before you and a clear recommendation for approval. In fact, we were not originally planning to speak today, but since two objectors had requested the opportunity to address you, we thought we would take up the offer too. Due mainly to the disruption caused by nutrient neutrality, we have spent over 4 years getting to this point of recommendation for approval by working strenuously over all this time with your planning team, your conservation and design team, and numerous others. Of all the developments I have worked on over a 30-year career, this one has been the development where we have indeed been probed and tested more than any other, as the normal planning timeline had been stretched by factors outside of ours and indeed Norwich City Centre's control. As articulated by your planning officer, we listened and changed and modified our plans so much that one of your own conservation and design officers stated that after all the changes we made with them and at their behest, that they almost preferred the new building design over the existing Debenhams building that I think they described at the time as being quite monolithic in nature. I do not intend to repeat what your planning officer has already set out so clearly, that this proposal complies with the requirements of both national and local planning policy, has been rigorously assessed and is recommended for approval. That is their job, and they have done it thoroughly during an extensive pre-application process and following submission on the planning applications. Instead, I want to focus on the choices before you today. Quite simply, there are two options. You can follow the recommendation of your own planning officers and vote to transform a long vacant, obsolete and dilapidated 1950s building, once successfully trading as Debenhams, but now that is of no beneficial use in the city centre, into a high quality, purpose-built student accommodation scheme with active retail at ground floor and basement level, bringing life, footfall and investment back into this part of Norwich city centre. Or you can go against that recommendation and accept that what you see today and what residents and visitors have walked past for the last 5 years will almost certainly continue to blight your city centre for years to come. Turning briefly to the objection from the University of East Anglia, as the planning officer mentioned, on the issue of engagement, I have here correspondence showing we contacted Vice Chancellor and President of the UEA in November 2024, outlining our proposals, outlining our experience and offering to meet. The Vice Chancellor responded saying they couldn't support the scheme, but our offer of a meeting was not taken forward by them. They have also questioned demand for more student accommodation and the design of our scheme. On the demand point, we are commercial developers and long-term operators of PBSA. Of course, we only invest where demand exists. Demand for this scheme has been assessed by your officers and found to be acceptable and in line with expectations, especially given that it will not open until the 2029-2030 academic year. If, hypothetically, demand were misjudged, what is the worst case outcome for Norwich? That the city gains a state-of-the-art building, high-quality accommodation and reinstated retail space in a prominent city centre location, rather than the boarded-up eyesore that exists today. Whether it is full or not is, of course, our risk as developers. On design, again, your officers have reviewed this in detail and concluded it is acceptable, policy compliant and suitable for students living in the city centre, which should of course be a different proposition than university halls on campus. It is also worth noting that the university is itself a provider of student accommodation with a diverse estate that includes both older and more recently developed buildings. So while we respect their position, it is reasonable to recognise that their objection comes perhaps from a different commercial perspective. Members, this scheme represents regeneration, investment, confidence in Norwich city centre and a practical solution to a building that has long since passed its useful life. We have been on a long journey with your officers. We have had to assess a number of theoretical options for the reuse of the building and its redevelopment. We have accepted many of the requested changes, including reducing the building's height by 2 stories, amended the design approach, and the viability position has been the subject of independent assessment by a third party. We have done all we can to align with officers' wishes. Buildings and sites of this nature are complicated, nuanced, and with challenges. Yet the proposals here before you will create many real benefits that outweigh any theoretical harm. These include bringing back a site that has been redundant since 2021, delivery of 377 student rooms in a highly sustainable location, contributing the equivalent of 295 new dwellings to meet your housing land supply challenges, freeing up market housing that would otherwise be used by students, providing new high-quality retail space and creating economic and environmental benefits. Approving a development that your own planning officers recommend is not the risky option today. It is the sensible, logical and responsible one for the city and the people of Norwich. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for that. We now move on to questions from members. David or Sarah, did you want to come back on?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to answer a couple of questions that were raised in one of the representations about the supplementary planning document for PBSA. Just to point out, in terms of the potential, and I'm going to call it potential to release other rented accommodation across Norwich, 41% of undergraduate full-time students currently live in other rented accommodation, which is mostly assumed to be HMOs. So there is the potential there that there will be some general needs housing released with the development of PBSA. And just further turning to kind of the SPD, officers in the policy team did liaise directly with both Norwich University of the Arts and the UEA in kind of coming together for this supplementary planning document, but neither university could provide up-to-date targets for future student numbers. So therefore our projections were based on general growth trajectory over time. But we did kind of produce the SPD on the basis of an expected current stock and pipeline, and that pipeline included this development because it was already submitted by the point that we did the SPD. So this is not in addition to what we're saying is the demand needs in the current supplementary planning document.
Thank you for that. Questions, any members? Yes. Yeah.
Whoever gets there.
Councillor Smith.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. Thank you. Right, thank you very much for the presentation and the report. Some linked questions, if I may, I suppose, around that word potential around the new gen. So we obviously have numerous purpose-built student blocks in the city. Have we done research over how many HMOs have been freed up by them? So do we have any kind of evidence to back up the potential that shows that over X number of years with these blocks being built, we have had X number of houses released at all?
Equivalently, no, we haven't. So it would be up to a student's choice kind of where they choose to live. But yeah, we haven't been able to make a direct correlation, but it is an assumption of potential.
Okay, thank you. And if a kind of follow-up one linked to, again, the national policy requiring us to deliver housing effectively where we can, and the idea that student housing is counted as that housing, which I can understand why it is, because again, it's linked to there's a place for them to live that isn't another house that would free them up. But just what is the exact wording of that in the kind of national framework about what we're required to do and how student housing falls into that? I'm just aware that if we were, for example, to reject this on whatever basis, this area is an important one. Not that I'm saying I've made a decision either way at the moment about that, but if we were, I imagine any challenge as ever would come down to the detail of the wording. So I'm just curious to know what the wording does actually say and how it relates to this issue of student housing being counted as permanent or permanent dwellings, for lack of a better term.
I can maybe help with that. I mean, the MPPF says that we're supposed to make provision for all housing needs, and it includes within that student housing, it includes care homes, literally all housing needs. So forecast demand for student accommodation is part of that housing need.
Thank you, Councillor Maguire.
Thank you, Chair. At this stage, we're just seeking information. Yeah, thank you. I have a number of questions, just some general planning ones and then some specific to the building. First of all, the building is not listed. Why was it not listed?
I can't really answer that question. I mean, we don't list the buildings. Historic England list the buildings, and obviously, excuse me, when they were listing other buildings in the area, this building would have been there, and the decision was made for whatever reason not to include it on the list of nationally significant buildings.
Thank you. Again, generally, in the city, are there any other 1950s buildings of that kind of proportion or size, or is that our largest 1950s built building in the city? Yes, so if we do demolish it, do we have any good examples of 1950s building which, you know, compared to some 1950s building, don't have much merit?
I mean, we've got to look at the building as it stands rather than as a kind of collection of architectural features for the city centre. And you'll note the comments from the Norwich Society about the building's quality in its own right. Obviously, those comments are not shared by everybody who's commented, but it remains a fact in terms of kind of planning policy that this is a non-designated heritage asset, so it doesn't have the same level of protection as other listed buildings. So you've got to kind of look at it in terms of this individual building's quality.
Okay, and my last question, or first group of questions, is they're specifically PBSA. Are there benefits in building PBSA instead of single person accommodation? I'm just wondering why it's gone into that designation, this application.
They're essentially commercial decisions as to what will deliver a return. I mean, I think we didn't specifically ask them to look at single persons accommodation. I think there are potential issues with doing a single type for open market housing on a particular block. But generally speaking, there are commercial decisions for a developer putting forward a proposal in preference for another one. But I think the fundamental point is we've got to look at the application that is before us and determine it on its merits, rather than necessarily looking at what other options might be available for the site.
Thank you. So I've got some specific questions with regard to the building, Chair. First of all, I'd really appreciate you bringing up a slide showing some of the upper stories. I'm particularly interested in the light well and provision of light to the inward looking rooms.
Oh, it is working now.
Can you come down, because we're looking at the top floor here?
That's the top floor.
Can you bring us down to, you know, second or third floor, please? That's grand. Can you just explain to me?
So yeah,
is this the extent of the access to light?
yeah. So the access to light that's the extent of. The cursor's not showing up, is it very well? But all of that space where you can see the green roof, that's kind of at the ground floor level, and so the courtyard is all of these rooms that you can see facing that courtyard. They're the walls of the inner part of the building that face the courtyard, and that's a glass roof above the lower ground floor within the courtyard. Yes, that's absolutely right. Yes.
Okay, and can you just tell me what the ratio is of window area to floor plan?
Yeah. I mean, I don't have that somewhere within all the application documentation. There probably is that information. Long story short, the applicant did submit a daylight sunlight assessment with the application, which assesses light levels to all rooms within the proposal. The vast majority have very good levels of natural light. There is a very small minority where it's not quite at the best level of natural light, but it's still adequate. and we living standards.
Within any standards?
Yeah.
And the answer, one question, it's relying on the light in the well. Yeah. I've got a comment which I'll make later rather than now, because I'm just seeking information at this stage. Thank you for that.
Sorry, just to kind of come back on that point. I mean, we describe it as a light well. It's only got 3 sides to it, obviously, so it's open on one of those 4 sides. So it's not purely going in the purest sense of a well. The well bit is the glass roof bit, which gives light down into the lower parts of the building. Sorry, could you go back? Try and find us some elevations that showed the. Go back to the floor plan that we were looking at. So yeah, it's open on for the majority of it. Open on one side.
There's more light coming in through this area, because the buildings on this side are slightly lower than the other buildings that would surround the courtyard. So there's sort of more natural light coming in from this direction to this area. So it's not fully surrounded by 8 stories on all sides.
So Sarah would also like to make a point.
Chair, do you want me to take, I've got quite a few other questions, just a fact. Do you want me to carry on, or are you looking to give other? Okay.
Yeah, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back on the other buildings of this kind of scale from the same era. There is the office block on Surrey Street and All Saints Green, which is by Aviva, and that's a kind of 6 to 8 story building of the same era. So there are other equivalent buildings of the same architectural style in Norwich.
Councillor Norwich.
Hello. Right. I'm going to be very green for a second and ask some environmental questions, because the environmental protection side doesn't say anything about air pollution. But when we come into Highways Authority, section 33, it says that there are going to be traffic and loading challenges, which means there's going to be an increase in arrival and departure traffic. And with the building itself actually being taller, what we do know about air quality is that when we have tall buildings with skinny streets like we do in that area, it results in a decrease in air quality. And we've already worked really, really hard in that area to improve air quality with buses and things like that. So is there any mitigation for that planned within this proposal?
Yeah, our environmental protection team requested an air quality assessment be provided as part of the application process, and they've assessed that, and they're satisfied with that and the recommendations that has within it. So it has been something that has been considered. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I was next. So I had a couple of questions. This first one quickly. Obviously, we've spoken about not necessarily looking at other accommodation rather than students. Obviously, the need, as apparently it's been approved on, is based on projection. We're living in a very volatile world. If that projection ends up to be wrong, have we got any evidence that this could be effectively repurposed as non-student accommodation without further expensive, timely redesign? Is the first one.
We haven't got any specific report that's been submitted that demonstrates that, but I think the building would be capable of being converted to, for example, a residential general market housing type development. It would probably need some alterations, but a lot of them would probably be internal. Yeah, it's certainly something that I think would be feasible, because I think one of the big things that this new building would provide is this central courtyard, which brings all the natural light into the middle of the building. It's also providing fairly generous sort of roof terrace as well. So I think it's possible it could be suitable or made suitable for alternative forms of accommodation. And, you know, we're not saying that this is the only type of development that's acceptable on this site, but this is the application that's before us, which we think is acceptable. It's also possible that the market may decide that a different type of development, you know, should be brought forward, and in which case we would assess that on its merits. But yeah, I think this building would be capable of being adapted without significant interventions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Just to come back on that point, because if consent was granted for this building and it was built, and the situation that Councillor Kane describes did arise, it would, pardon me, we're all getting. I'm fine. Planning permission would be required because it would be a change of use. So we would have control over kind of what came after.
Yeah, sure. I'm just worried about it sitting empty. But second question on going back to what Councillor Smith was talking about. So we've spoken about how this may free up HMOs, you know, from students. I lived in HMOs for years. It wasn't because I liked it. It was because it was cheaper. We've been told that there is there's no viability for affordable housing here. So have we got any kind of what's the word, comparison in cost between living in a city centre one student flat like this would be and a room in an HMO?
Not in support of the application, but there are some kind of PBSA affordability criteria set out in table 10 of the supplementary planning document, which shows that in the private rented sector, and I'm not saying this is in the city centre, the annual cost is about £8,256. PBSA ranging from kind of a lower cost to a higher cost isn't too dissimilar to that. The lower cost is about 6,000, so you know, £2,000 a year cheaper, depending on the kind of upper cost of a PBSA. That's one of your kind of studio flats, so much more high end, and that is obviously more expensive, about 12,300. So yeah, lower cost PBSA like this in the city centre may well be at that kind of lower end, and therefore more affordable and therefore potentially more attractive. Of course, that's all a potential crystal ball gazing, may not happen, but it's a choice of the market.
Thank you.
Councillor Hampton.
Thank you. Yeah, coming into this, a lot of my questions were around the student accommodation aspects of what UEA have said, and Sarah's response and Charlie's question has been really helpful. But picking up again on the meaningful consultation point, are there any kind of further reasonable steps we would have expected the applicant to take, or did that just become difficult in light of UEA making it clear they weren't supporting NUA? I think we said not responding, but is there anything else that should have been done on that front? And I think some of this was kind of answered in the previous question, but the supplementary planning document and the pipeline that far exceeds kind of projected need. As we've sort of heard, I presume we're anticipating that not all those applications will ever come to fruition because the need gets met and people have to rethink the use and go back for kind of change of consent if needs be. I'm trying to get my head around how strongly therefore we can weight that, but this was in the pipeline. So as far as we're concerned, we're just looking at the merits of this scheme and not necessarily is that correct?
I mean, in terms of, oh yes, but yeah.
Meaningful consultation, was that met kind of?
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. Yeah, I mean, I think the applicant has done as much as they can. They did approach the universities. They also did submit their own assessment of need with the application that was done by a consultant, and you know that concludes that there is need as well. So they have kind of complied as much as they can with the requirements that we asked them to when submitting a planning application, even if they haven't been able to fully comply with all of the every single bullet point of the SPD.
Councillor Hunt.
Some of my questions are quite similar to Emma's, but I guess the one that hasn't been answered is how, because it says, in section 104, it says we should be, this is, student numbers will grow and by 2038, 2039, there may be demand for, and that's a number not hugely above what we've currently got with the ziggurats coming back in. So, I mean, my question is, how far ahead should we be planning as a planning committee? How much should we be waiting? It's based on law. We don't need it in the next 10 years. We don't need it in the time it will take to come online. So how much should we be waiting at as a committee? Because it seems to me to go against policy, but it doesn't go against policy in 20 years, maybe, well, 10, 15 years.
So, yeah, so our position is it doesn't go against policy because this site forms part of the pipeline that will help to meet that future need. I think in terms of what should you be considering as a committee, I think it's the timeline of the Greater Norwich Local Plan and SPD, which kind of runs till 2038, 39. So that's the kind of plan period that we're sort of working towards, and that's what all the data that we've got is aimed at. And of course, as we've heard, this will take some time to build. I think they're hoping to they would be hoping to open it for the 2029-30 academic year, by which time there will be additional students in Norwich, and there will be additional demand by then. And so actually this will help to meet a need within the next 10 years. And so, yeah, that's the time frame that you should be considering, really, what is set out in the report.
Councillor Sands.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a number of questions. First of all, it strikes me as being an extremely intensive sort of development as far as residents go, with it's either 377 or 406 bed spaces. And I'm wondering, first of all, if the rooms meet minimum size requirements. But some of my other concerns relate to all the sheer size of the building and what happens in the event of an emergency. I can't see any evidence in there of dry risers for fighting fires or whatever. And what happens, for example, if there is a fire, perhaps in an e-bike in the bike storage area? I noticed the escape stairs are right adjacent to that. And how do I evacuate from my room on the 6th floor? And other more prosaic questions. We've got green roofs here. I'm highly suspect of green roofs, despite some enthusiasm for them. What's the expected useful life of a green roof? And how or who will maintain the planting on the green roof, especially in the event of the dry summers we are told to expect? And another question, will the building, which is a business, be subject to business rates? Because of course there's going to be council tax not paid by students there. And of course, if there was a department store still there, they would be paying business rates.
So in terms of the room sizes for the students, so it is 377 bed spaces. They all comply with best practice guidance in terms of room size. The cluster bedrooms are all typically 13.5 square meters in size. Those don't have the kitchens. They will share the communal living areas with communal kitchens. And then the other rooms are typically 18 square meters in size. And that is all in line with best practice in terms of minimum floor space for students. So actually, although there's a lot of bed spaces all put together in the building, the room sizes are perfectly generous and normal for student accommodation. Fire safety, we have consulted the health and safety executive. The applicant was required to submit a fire statement with the application, which demonstrates all of the fire safety features of the building and how it will meet the requirements of the regulations. The health and safety executive have confirmed to us that they're happy with that. So there are sufficient stair cores, escape routes, and all the fire safety provisions that you would expect to see within a modern building. But also a lot of that is covered by building regulations. So, you know, that will be looked at again by building regulations to make sure that they comply with that. But it will be fully compliant based on the land use planning sort of design of it, is what we've been told. Green roof areas, we've got a landscape condition that's recommended, so there will be a management and maintenance plan that applicant will be required to submit, and that will set out how they manage the green roofs and any other areas of planting within the development. And also the management plan, we will have a management plan to agree how that this is managed in a way works well for the students and retailers, and sort of is managed well as well. So all of that will be captured in a management plan, and we can control that to make sure that the green roofs are successful. Business rates, yeah, my understanding is that all the commercial spaces would be subject to the usual business rates charges.
That doesn't answer my question. I mean, the student accommodation is a business. It's a factory for producing money from students for a business. Will that be subject to business rates, or will the students be paying council tax? Because there's an awful lot of money lost there to city council otherwise.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, whatever the answer to that question is, that's not a material planning consideration.
In other words, no.
Well, no, it's just not material to the decision that the committee has to make today.
Councillor Maguire. That's right, you can answer another couple. If not, we could be back to you all afternoon, and I'd like to be home by about 4. Thank you. The one with the well in the middle.
Thinking about the full sense who has this room. Just orientation, am I right? North?
So north is where the cursor is. So the north is on the left-hand side of that.
I see. So, so this.
So that room would have a north-facing window to that
right room. Residence. Okay. We're going to have to rely on high maintenance then to ensure that the occupant of this room gets reflected light, because most of the light will be reflected light in that space. Can you, as a planner, enforce full maintenance? I mean, I know we're going to go slightly into a comment, Chair, but one of the problems that I think is enforcing legislation to do with housing, central London, light wells they were never cleaned, they were, stuff was thrown down, place was filthy, and so the reflection was, not quite zero. Actually, is the way that you as a planner can sit on planning the maintenance to maximise what light is available?
Well, as I said, we will have a management and maintenance plan conditioned as part of this. Yeah, we can enforce it. But I think there's also a commercial interest in the operator of this making sure that everything's kept clean and well managed, because ultimately that they want students to come and occupy their building, and if it's not kept in a good state of repair, then maybe they'll have difficulty in letting the rooms. I think the other thing is, yeah, we recognise that not every single room has perfect daylight and outlook with this development, but that is common on city centre schemes that are high density on constrained sites. And the key point is that the vast majority of these rooms have very good access to daylight and sunlight. There are some that doesn't quite meet the gold standard, but it's good enough, and so we are satisfied, and we have carefully reviewed the daylight sunlight assessment to make sure. And we did actually also ask for some tweaks to this design to kind of address some of the situations where there was poor daylight. So I'm confident that won't be an issue.
If I can.
What's that, sorry?
Do you live in that room?
Yeah, I would, yeah. As a student, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, sorry, can I just come back on it? That, I mean, as Rob has alluded to, we would have a management plan for the entire site. So the maintenance of that area, of that roof area, would fall within the purview of that management. I think the other point that I'd make is this isn't really about reflected light. It's about getting natural light, both from above and from that side in. It's the assessment that we've had done, the kind of industry standard assessment for sunlight and daylight, and getting natural light into those rooms isn't predicated on reflected light off a particular a material with a particular reflectivity to it. It's actually just getting light from above and light from the side. So the levels of light into that particular room, and bearing in mind we're kind of focusing on a relatively small part of the scheme, is not predicated on the maintenance of the of the walls of that light well, for want of a better word.
Okay, thank you. My questions on future proofing have been asked, which is good. Can
I ask why you didn't ask these yesterday or the day before or whatever? Because they could have all been sorted out.
Chair, I can answer that. Thank you. Because I'm a sub-chair and I didn't have enough time. And when I've been on the planning committee for the Broads Authority, questions were always asked in the open room so that everybody knew what was asked and what the answers were. That's a particular answer to you, Chair. No, I've got comments, but no questions. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the comprehensive report and presentation. It's answered a few of my questions, but I have some. Policy DM9 requires that loss of locally identified heritage assets is only acceptable where there is no reasonably practical or viable means of retaining the asset within redevelopment. Given that the building is structurally sound and considered capable of retrofit, what specific evidence demonstrates that structural retention is not reasonably practical, as distinct from being less profitable or more complex?
So it's the building is physically capable of being converted. The problem is it's not possible to do that in a way that would deliver a profit or return to a developer. So ultimately, the cost involved with making this building, adapting this building for a viable use for the future, is so great, and the return they'd get from the subsequent rent or sale of that is lower significantly, that they would basically make a huge loss, which basically means nobody's going to do it. And the applicant has provided lots of information where they've sort of looked at all the different options of what could possibly be done with this building, where you'd retain it, and different ways of adapting it, and including knocking a light well through the middle of it, and things like that. But the thing is, the more interventions you make on the existing building, the greater the cost. And yeah, none of them stack up. We've got detailed spreadsheets full of costings, and they all show that any proposal to retain this building would result in a loss to a developer.
Okay, thank you. Can I come back on that? And I've got some more questions as well. So the DM9 says that that it has to be reasonably practicable or viable. You're concentrating on viability, but there is suggestion that a retrofit would be practicable and there are examples elsewhere that are actually in the report. Is that true?
Can I just, I think that the issue of practicality and viability are tied up. because to actually bring forward a development, but you have to have both of those. It has to be practically capable of being done and viable. Otherwise, you just won't get anything. So when you look at the totality of that requirement, we have been through it almost to the nth degree, and we have satisfied ourselves as officers certainly that there isn't a practical and viable alternative that would deliver redevelopment of this site.
Okay, so for the benefit of the committee, it says in DM9 would no reasonably practicable or viable means, not and viable means. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's key because so this is in paragraph 85, and then it which goes over onto page 26, and my understanding of the way part B is worded, where it says, so development resulting in harm to or loss of significance of a locally identified asset will only be acceptable where A, there are demonstrable and overriding benefits associated with the development. So, okay, we're confident that is satisfied. And then B, it can be demonstrated there would be no reasonably practicable or viable means of retaining the asset within a development. It doesn't say practicable and viable. They're only required to demonstrate one of those requirements. So they either need to demonstrate that it's not affordable to do it or that it's not practical to do it. And they've demonstrated that it's not financially viable to do it. They don't have to demonstrate both because of the use of the word or.
That really isn't my reading of that clause at all. That suggests to me you have to prove one or the other, and the reasonably practicable is proven as a possibility for this site.
No, my reading of it is that they just have to demonstrate that it's either that it's not reasonably practicable to reuse the building, or it's not viable to reuse the building. So, and they've demonstrated it's not viable to retain the building. So that's all that requires them to do. It doesn't require both.
I guess the word would be and.
Councillor Maguire, another question?
I mean, it really depends which way you look at it. I think it's
well, that's something you have to
ambiguous
take
to say the least.
The cabinet or something.
I have got more questions.
Oh, did you?
Please, yeah. So policy GNLP 5 supports purpose-built accommodation only where need is justified by the size of Norwich's higher education institutions. The report acknowledges current provision is sufficient, that the pipeline could create oversupply, and that the UEA objects. Can officers explain how the proposal satisfies requirements to demonstrate justified need, and what weight should be given to the identified risk of market over-centralisation?
I'll be honest, I think we've already done that. I think
what weight should be given to this?
Well, in the tilted balance, we would argue that significant weight should be given to the housing that this scheme delivers, and I think that's set out in the conclusions of the report.
Another one? I've got three more.
Well, all about policy.
Well,
nothing about the colour of bricks or
we're discussing policy. Yeah, this is about policy. Yeah. It's a planning hearing. Yeah. In weighing heritage harm against the public benefits under the MPPF, how have officers assessed the embodied carbon impact of demonstrating a structurally sound building, and has a comprehensive whole life carbon assessment been undertaken comparing demolition and developments with structural retention and deep retrofit?
So we haven't looked at that in terms of as a heritage consideration. We've looked at it as an environmental consideration for its own sake. There hasn't been a whole life carbon assessment carried out versus retaining the building compared to redeveloping the site, but not national and local planning policy doesn't require that to be carried out. That's not a policy requirement. You know, it might become that in the future, and which would be great, but there's no policy requirement to do that. What we have done is made sure that this development will, you know, be a highly sustainable development in terms of its building materials, its construction processes, and also the technologies that are incorporated within the building that will make it a highly sustainable building.
Okay, thank you. I've got two more just in response to what has already been said elsewhere. So in reference to existing elevations that are not aesthetically pleasing, you showed us a photo earlier from, I think, from the castle. Is it reasonable to compare the proposed new elevations to old views, where the real comparison would be against what is possible with retrofit?
Well, I'm showing you what's proposed. So the application before us is the redevelopment of the site. So I'm showing you visualizations based on the application that's before us to allow you to make the best assessment possible and to see how that would appear. We're not looking at a proposal to retain the building. That's not the proposal. Therefore, I don't think it's unreasonable to not show that, because we haven't got any designs that before us that would show that. We're not here to consider that.
Okay, so the existing views are almost immaterial.
No, the existing views are what you're assessing it against. I think what the point that Rob is making is we don't have a proposal that we can show you that is for the retrofit. So the baseline that you're looking at is what's there now.
Okay, but it would be possible to improve a building of this type.
We don't have a proposal in front of the committee to actually show what that would actually look like.
I accept that. Okay, is it true that this type of accommodation will only attract further demand if it is affordable? This is in reference to something Sarah said. What evidence have you received that this accommodation will be affordable and therefore attract the demand to redirect students from HMOs?
I think the issue there is twofold. That even if it doesn't attract demand from HMOs, there's still an identified need for the number of student units that the scheme proposes. The potential for it to attract students out of HMOs and thereby release family housing is one potential benefit, but notwithstanding that, there is still a need to provide over the lifetime of the plan for the forecast demand for students. So, yeah.
Thank you. That's my questions. Chair.
Well, Chair, I just talking to somebody in my very first enforced the outcome of buildings like this. I think the light to that north facing internal facade will be mostly reflected light, and therefore I think maintenance is going to be really primary in any kind of permission for this application. So,
thank you, Chair. Goes over a lot of the ground we've already covered, I think, but it's just kind of maybe clarification for myself. So apologies if this says more about my ignorance than the actual the issues. But my understanding is obviously we're deciding on material planning concerns and for this application, and commercial viability market decisions aren't necessarily a material planning concern. However, they are obviously tied in to the recommendation to approve it, that it will deliver various economic benefits, and that is based on it being a building that is used and not disused. I know we can't predict the future, and obviously our job is to make the decision about whatever the potential benefits are. They outweigh the damage done to heritage, amenity, etc. So just want to check that that's the correct logic to be applying. And just with that in mind, I did sort of question the points in the conclusion recommending the approval. And again, a lot of it would come back to that, whether the number of students continues to increase as we expect it will. Could you just say a few words on the methodology behind why we are expecting to see ever increasing students in Norwich, given how this week I'm sure everyone's seen that student loans and the university sector has been in the news quite heavily. Now I accept that things there could change a lot and we're dealing in potentials, but any more information on the why we're confident that there will be lots more students to make this developer's risk worth taking, we appreciate it. And just tied to that, again, in the new paragraphs 81, 169, where they talk about the level of harm, 81 ends by pointing out that there's only harm is only considered in the high range, is around Rampant Horse Street, Marks and Spencer end of the building, whereas in the overall, the level of harm is identified as less than substantial at predominantly moderate level. Now, I know this is obviously a subjective, not a scientific measure, but could you say a bit more on what is meant by those terms and how those judgments of moderate to low to significant came about?
So, should I take that point first, or if that's okay? Yeah. Those points came about through a detailed assessment by our conservation officers, where they looked at the impact on each individual heritage asset, from the grade 1 listed buildings like the castle right down to locally listed buildings like Marks and Spencer's. And in the vast majority of cases, the level of harm was considered to be moderate, a moderate level of less than substantial. So I should explain that the NPPF talks about 3 levels of harm in effect in terms of heritage impacts. You've got complete loss, you've got substantial harm, which is generally a very high bar, and then you've also got less than substantial harm. And less than substantial harm is still an important level of harm to consider. Now, within that less than substantial harm, the conservation officers have kind of come up with a way of grading different degrees of less than substantial harm. So that's where, so the high, medium, low, and negligible all fall within that less than substantial harm. So that's why, yeah, overall, in the majority of cases, it's a moderate level of less than substantial harm, but there's that one exception, and in some cases it's low, but there is that one locally listed building, which is on the corner, the Marks and Spencer's building, where they consider the impact to be high, primarily because it's in very close proximity to the site. That's just. But in the conclusion, yeah, the conservation officers have informed us that the overall impact on heritage is less than substantial at the moderate scale. That explains the conclusion. I'll just see if I can find a photo of that building.
So we're saying that the harm that was identified in the high range next to Marks and Spencer's is because that's the closest heritage asset, or it's physically closest to that heritage asset, and it's further away from the other ones, so it does less harm to them. Is that the kind of logic we're
That's not
on?
is part of the logic in assess. Yeah, because proximity is one of the things that you use to assess the level of harm, but it's not the only one. But it's the building on the left-hand side there, and yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's in very close proximity to this new building. The building will be of an increased scale and size, and therefore the impact. The conservation officer felt that the impact was highest on that building out of all of the other assets. But I think, as planners, how we look at that, we clearly take that on board and consider it, and also we have negotiated improvements to the design of that frontage to help sort of make it more sympathetic to the building of the Marks and Spencer's. But ultimately, it's a locally listed asset, so it's not of statutory importance. So that kind of goes into the balance as well, and we sort of have to give weight to that it's not the most important heritage asset out of all the ones that we've got available.
Can I just respond to the first question? Sorry.
You wanted to, yes.
Yeah, in terms of the kind of the need for additional PBSA, we obviously adopted our previous guidance note in 2019 and cognizant of the amount of development that has happened across the city and other changes in student accommodation. We commissioned a report by ACOM which looked at a whole raft of data. I won't go into that, but that informed the supplementary planning document, which, just to reiterate, included not only the stock that was already built, but that stock that was in the pipeline, which included this application. So if we were considering an application that hadn't been included and had come in after the publication of that supplementary planning document, we may be in a very different situation, and we may be saying that that's oversupply. But as the SPD stands, we're saying that this is part of that delivery to meet housing demand from students, which we have a statutory duty to provide.
Thank you.
Can I have a quick follow-up on that? Okay.
Well, that'd be a comment then, wouldn't it?
Well, it's a follow-up question, just based on the answer.
Another question. Go on then.
Yeah, so again, the applicant, through no fault of their own, this has been in the pipeline for a long time. And obviously, I'm sure we wouldn't want to or shouldn't disadvantage them for that. So they're in the pipeline. But again, does that study take account of the changing market conditions effectively, that student numbers could drop through the floor next academic year? For potentially, if there was some exchange event. Again, I understand this is hypothetical, but again, just trying to get my mind, or potentially, and how much weight we give to this. Again, how weighty do we need to consider the idea that they're already in the pipeline, they're already included, but things could change drastically.
I think you could say that about anything. For example, no one was expecting a pandemic to happen and the impact that that's had on retail. How the market responds to changes is up to the market. It's not for the planning system to kind of control market forces. So if the developer got consent for this, student numbers fell, they decided not to do it, or they had gone through it and built it, there would be the opportunity for someone else to come and convert it to a residential use with some internal changes, or they could make the choice to walk away. So, and that's up to the market. It's not up to the planning system to control that kind of aspect of things.
Okay, any more questions? Because desperately need something. And it ain't me, so but I shall go. Can we break for 10 minutes and come back, please? So we have discussions and then carry on after.
My kidneys
apologise to the
appreciate
members.
it.
We'll be back in 10 minutes.
Yeah, I'm not going to get to my 12:30. I'm supposed to be meeting a resident about a housing issue. Yeah. Well, for him, they've got to make reasonable adjustments for you, haven't they? Yeah, exactly. I think they have to be, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, it may be a last chance.
Oh. Well, either way, I've got to go at 2:30, so. Got a school work. Yes.
So we're now moving on to discussions and recommendations. Anyone wish to speak? So everyone? Councillor Sands? Oh, you go back. Councillor Hampton.
Okay, thank you. And first, I'm really glad we did have quite a thorough session of questions. There are definitely things that in my mind I was kind of struggling a little bit on the balance of how to take things into account, but it's really helped clear a lot of things up. And it's by no means the ideal scheme. I'm sure if it were in our power, most of us, if we were starting from scratch, would do something different. But we've got to look at what's in front of us and balance the planning considerations we are able to take into account, and especially those that we're meant to give most weight to. So I'm concluding at the moment that I think voting to not support this isn't a particularly sound decision. Obviously, we have to come back as ever to the fact we don't have a 5-year land supply and need to place a great deal of weight on this. And I think we heard it's what 377 units and contributing just under 300 to the land supply, going by the methodology in the student accommodation SPD, which is clearly fairly substantial, and it's a redevelopment of a brownfield site in a highly sustainable city centre location. I do think it's especially regrettable that there can't be affordable housing provision, but we've heard that that's on account of the viability of the scheme that's been independently assessed. It's an issue we're well used to dealing with here, I think, and it's remains policy compliant, unfortunately. We know that there'll be a loss of a building which has some local heritage significance, even if it's not listed. But I do think the design of the replacement is of good quality, and obviously it brings the building back into use, restores some of that retail frontage, and make sure it's hopefully not left remaining vacant for years to come. It's a really core visible city centre site, widely considered an eyesore, and doing nothing will also affect the amenity of the city centre, of those listed and heritage buildings in the area. So that doesn't feel like a positive option either. I fully agree with, I think, consensus that demolition isn't ideal as a starting point, but also the limitations and constraints of being able to do anything viable with this building, given its kind of dimensions, the sort of demand issues for department stores and retail use. And it's been shown that other options were quite fully considered. So and we discussed briefly, but there is obviously environmental impacts of demolishing, but rebuilding to higher energy efficient standards, and with that sustainable technology does mean there will be environmental benefits going forward as well. There lots of discussion about demand for student accommodation, but we've heard that this is incorporated into the pipeline of the PBSA supplementary planning document, which has been fairly recently adopted and based on the most up-to-date and robust evidence base available, and as I say, quite recently. So there doesn't feel a particularly sound reason there to not accept this, and if that demand changes, it feels like that's primarily a risk for the developer, and any changes would have to come back through planning anyway. So as I say, not with a kind of great amount of joy, I will vote in favour for this on the balance, and especially taking into account, as we have to, the need to provide housing towards the supply issue.
Just to say, I think I do have some concerns about how this, whether this, I know the officers have said it does go in line with planning policy around future need and all of that, but I'm just not sure how satisfied I feel about that at this point. And that would be the reason for turning it down if I had one.
Thank you, Chair. So I have a couple of different concerns about it, because, well, I mean, this idea about growing student need kind of confuses me, because, I mean, we have seen in 2024 to 2025 a 6% decrease in students from overseas, EU and non-EU. So when we're talking about the affordability, we're basically saying that we need to make sure that these are affordable for UK students. And I feel like every time we come to this committee at the moment, we talk about the fact that there is a requirement for affordable housing, and then we can never actually get that affordable housing. It seems that as long as I've been a councillor, each assessment is that we can't actually provide that affordable housing. So I think that's quite frustrating. However, what we are weighing up is the whether or not the benefits outweigh the damage to the conservation area, and I am struggling to see that damage being severe enough to vote against. However, I personally feel as though we should be attempting to preserve this building. So for that reason, I'm going to be abstaining because I don't think that I have the ability to vote against based on the law and based on what's in front of me. But I do think that this is not a viable option.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for all the presentations and answering of the questions. I'm still concerned about that, not only that north-facing internal facade, but even the east-facing one, which is quite long. We know what the sun does, and that's going to be a problem. I think there will be environmental issues in that those people, particularly on the north-facing internal facade, will have their lights on all the time. We will have permanent supplementary artificial lighting installations effectively, and that has its environmental cost. It's a human scale building. You just look at it, and it's part of Norwich. However, it is just sitting there. The proposal to replace it with something quite an imposing facade on one corner, that is typical of many new architectural styles going up in cities. It's not Norwich, I think. It's that kind of faux Art Deco, Cunard style that we're seeing more and more of. It's not this, that's almost a vernacular style. Having said that, it is sitting empty. It needs to be used. It's difficult to find a use. And so with assurances, and I will suggest, it may not be accepted, a condition with regarding to maintenance to maximise the light available, I will hold my nose and vote for this to be accepted.
Thank you, Chair. Just I'd echo, I suppose, the comments of Councillor Hampton, Councillor Maguire and Councillor Knight. I don't really have anything else to add other than from my understanding of the planning process as it is, dealing with this application that is the one in front of us, I don't see grounds to turn it down, and I'm hopeful that it will deliver the benefits and the returns for the city centre and the developer that we've heard about.
I will be very quick. I'd like to, again, echo the comments of my colleagues, particularly of Councillor Knight. I find it extremely frustrating that we're meant to be building affordable housing and we just can't, apparently, and that every developer can just say, oh, well, we can't do that. However, I also recognise that that is not a material reason to vote against it. I am struggling with whether I believe the identified need has been met for the housing, particularly with the UEA saying it isn't. So I'm going to sit here and think about whether I abstain or vote against if I feel that I have met a material need for voting against. If it were based on what was right, I would certainly be voting against. And I just, yeah, feel very upset about that.
I'm in favour of PBSA. All my 3 children went away to university and lived in expensive, poorly maintained HMOs. I know this could be in a different scenario, a really fabulous development. But I'm concerned that we are committing a significant building so central and key to Norwich to a highly specific population based on assumed guessed, not actual future numbers. As we've seen in recent years, international students and domestic educational preferences are subject to unpredictable and political changes. When we are talking about future projections, we should be using may, not will. I do not believe we can say there are demonstrable and overriding benefits associated with the development, quoting from policy there, or that we have clear and convincing justification, again quoting from policy, for this development to be permitted. We currently have hundreds of empty student rooms, albeit some in need of refurbishment. Our education provider, our key education provider here in Norwich, is stating that the need is not demonstrable. In Nottingham City Council's PBSA policy, they state that any new applications for PBSA require developers to provide evidence of how the development could be converted into other residential uses if needed in the future. If we did have that, I would be much clearer about how to vote today. But putting all that aside about need, I also feel that with this central Norwich location, traffic and pollution concerns have not been taken seriously enough. Every year, hundreds of students will need to be moved at similar times, at a time of peak tourist numbers descending into the city. I know from my own children, it normally required 2 carloads to empty their room because it's amazing how much they cram in. I don't think one loading bay is going to be enough, and there's no mention of cargo bikes. So if this was elsewhere, I might be looking at it more favourably, but I really cannot see how this is the right thing to do for such a key central building in the middle of Norwich.
Me? Yes, sorry. Thank you. I think councillors do have good reason to vote against this. So I'll just run through a few things. So the bar for acceptable light is generally very low anyway. I noted we didn't see an elevation view from the open section so that we could visualise the rooms inside that space. The open section is more or less northwest facing, so will not receive any light for much of the day during summer and none at all in winter, that whole section. There's no evidence that this model will draw any demand away from local housing HMOs. The total absence of affordable housing contribution is a concern again. There will be future Section 106 reassessment, but committee should note it's been confirmed just today, I think, that where any assessments have taken place in Norwich, none have so far resulted in new affordable housing contributions, which tells us everything we need to know about that process. So I think the Norwich Society angle, that demolition would be acceptable with a genuine contribution in the resulting new building, has some merit, but the policy test for demolition has not been met. The existing building is a structurally sound, non-designated heritage asset that makes a positive contribution to the conservation area. The policy DM9 requires retention wherever reasonably practicable. I'm not satisfied that the full demolition has been clearly and convincingly justified, and I believe that the officer interpretation of DM9B, which concludes clearly in favour of demolition, removes and undermines the safeguard DM9 is designed to provide. That interpretation cannot be the intention of DM9, which is titled, remember, Safeguarding Norwich's Heritage. Although the identified heritage harm is described as less than substantial in the moderate range, there is an assessment at the high level, and it must still be given considerable importance and weight, significant weight, in my view. And the public benefits do not outweigh that harm, particularly given the uncertainty around the need for this level of student accommodation. For these reasons, I consider the proposal conflicts with the development plan and must be refused. So the reasons to refuse are as conflict with DM9, GNLP3, Sections 66 and 72, I believe, of the Planning Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act 1990 and NPPF Section 16. The failure to justify the need for PBSA conflicts with GNLP 5. If other PBSA pipeline applications are given permission, and there are going to be plenty of them, there is very quickly going to be structural oversupply of this type of accommodation. And at 10%, as reported today from the UEA, we are already on the verge of that oversupply. The conversion to housing supply is a desk-based formula. In practice, it provides no real benefit as a student accommodation, which I've already explained, because it won't necessarily, because of the costs, it won't take demand away from local housing. And there's insufficient climate justification for demolition, which conflicts with DM1, GNLP2 and MPPF Section 14. So as you can probably guess, I'm going to vote against on that basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If people weren't
declaration of interest at the beginning, I did say I work for UEA. I just add a little bit more clarification there. I'm a contract researcher. My whole salary is based on external to UEA research funding. So it's got nothing to do with any viability of UEA bank balance. I just wanted to make that really clear for transparency purposes. Thank you.
Thanks for that clarification. That's good. If people weren't as willing to add to the fortunes of the likes of Mr. Bezos or Zuckerberg or whoever owns the likes of Amazon, I'm sure that Debenhams would still be operating as a department store. I do find, however, that the sheer intensity or density of accommodation proposed in this development to be too high, and I continue to have severe reservations concerning fire safety and the ability of residents to evacuate the building in the event of an emergency. We all remember what happened at Grenfell Tower. It is a pity also that there seems to be no provision for students who won't be able to afford the mortgage size rents that will be applied. That by my estimation will create an annual rental return of around about £2.6 million. I can find no grounds, however, to object to this development, but sadly also no grounds to support. Therefore, I will abstain.
I just wanted to say, after hearing my colleagues' opinions, I have decided to change my mind and I will probably be voting against.
Yeah, just to add, I didn't pick it up in my original remarks, but Councillor Young mentioned traffic and pollution concerns, which I'm sort of interested where that came from. Mentioned that there'll be hundreds of extra traffic movements. It's a car-free development, so presumably that will be at quite localised times, arrival, departure of students. There's provision detailed in the papers about how that would be managed. I think, was it by a Fickthorn or Park and Ride, that sort of system. We've discussed about sufficient bike storage. Air quality was picked up in the discussion and in the papers as well. So I'm not entirely sure where those extra concerns have come from and might be interested to hear more if there was things we haven't picked up so far in the discussion. But presumably this also isn't going to strictly induce more students coming to the city as one scheme. They're going to be arriving by car almost certainly somewhere in the city, and it's not directly at this development. So I thought actually the traffic concerns were picked up quite well in here, and it's clear that it is a sustainable development overall.
No recommendation anywhere there, just people saying which way they want to build. So I'm going to move the recommendation. The recommendation is to approve. Can I have a second for that? Thank you. Anyone else wish to say anything? Now we'll move to the vote then. If you want. All those in favour, please show.
So that is a recorded vote. So in favour is councillors Driver, Hampton, Maguire, Smith.
Those against, please show.
So against is councillors Stootley, Haynes, Knight, Kane and Young.
And extensions.
So that's councillor Mike Sands.
Okay, we need to know why you rejected. Sarah?
Just as members are forming their proposed reasons for refusal, I just want to remind you of the tilted balance that applies in the absence of a housing land supply. So you will need to make sure your reasons for refusal cover this. And that is that where the development plan policies are out of date, we should be granting planning permission unless the adverse impacts of doing so significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. And that should have particular regard to directing development to sustainable locations, making effective use of land, securing well-designed places. There are a number of benefits to which significant weight should be attached, set out in the report. So I would direct you to saying how you consider the development does not meet those requirements.
Members who vote against proposal.
I go first? Yeah, thank you. Well, okay, so we can start with DM9, which I believe has been interpreted wrongly, because it is designed to protect heritage assets such as this, and the test has not been met.
Sorry, I need to come back on that. I mean, if we get to an appeal position and we're cross-examined on the wording, it's quite clear that that policy says or, not and. What it says. I mean, we can try and interpret in a different direction, but in a different way. But if we were taken through the wording, if we're faced with a barrister who's cross-examining a witness, the wording of that policy is or, not and.
Okay. Well, A in there, there are demonstrable and overriding benefits associated with the development. I don't believe there are, and that's one of the reasons that I put in my assessment. Sorry. Yes, I don't believe there are demonstrable benefits. I believe that the benefit is marginal and it's quite narrow as student accommodation. And what else did I? That's my questions. So there's the issue with light, although I don't think that has a huge huge impact. The failure to provide a Section 106 contribution, and the heritage harm is significant. And one of the things I didn't say actually in my assessment was that the panel should be listening to its conservation officers, and there is significant harm, at least to one aspect of this, where the highest level of the building is. So there's a number of things there on which to justify refusal.
Okay. I mean, we have to have evidence. You've refused the application, so you've got to, we've got to come up with reasons. But it's vital that those reasons are defensible. I mean, the language that we use in expressing our reasons for refusal must use policy compliant language. Significant is not a kind of policy compliant language. You've got the substantial, the harm that's been identified from our own conservation officers, and that you've also heard from the Norwich Society, is less than substantial. And the NPPF allows you and allows us as a council to weigh those benefits against that harm. So what I would encourage you to do, and I don't know whether you need to kind of adjourn to kind of consider this, is you need to kind of look at the benefits that we've set out as officers in paragraph 173 and decide why those benefits do not outweigh the less than substantial moderate harm which you are entitled to weigh up. You also need to decide to look at the weights that the NPPF directs the local planning authority to attach to, for example, substantial weight to the value of reusing suitable brownfield land. So I don't know whether you want to, yeah, as I say, adjourn, consider these points, and then come back. Because if we don't get this right, then we are going to put the council in a very difficult position when it comes to defending this appeal. We've already okay.
Well,
may I suggest an adjournment so that we don't feel rushed to do that under the Thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to adjourn the meeting.
We have. Not yet. No, that's why we're adjourning.
My phone, I'm going to ask the public to leave for about 2 pieces. We're now back in the full committee again. I'll just ask Robert to explain exactly where we are.
Thank you, Chairman. So just as an introduction, as I wasn't here at the start of the meeting, my name is Robert Carmichael. I'm the Democratic Services Manager. I have been listening to the meeting in its entirety on the live stream so that I am aware of the discussions and issues that have been raised in this meeting. Just a quick point for clarification of where we are and also what has happened during the break. So essentially, the committee has not made a decision at this point. The proposal was voted down. As I understand it, there is an alternative proposal that is being put forward by Councillor Stootley, and an adjournment was taken so that advice could be sought for Councillor Stootley for that proposal that will be put to the committee. So no other actions have taken place in that time, and no member discussions have taken place outside of the public sphere. So what we will do next is the proposal from Councillor Stootley will be put to members. I would just like it noted, and I believe my colleague Leonia, Senior Officer, will confirm that we have 2 members that have now left the meeting. Is that I believe Councillor Laws has also left, but he was also not able to participate in this item anyway. So it's Councillor Knight, and is there another Councillor Kane? Sorry, thank you, councillors. So as such, I'd invite you, Chair, to ask Councillor Stootley to put forward his proposal, as previously said, based on the advice that was sought from officers during the break.
Councillor Stootley, would you like to propose another reason?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for members of the public for waiting while we organised that. My motion is a proposal to refuse the application on the grounds that I hope that Leonie will be able to read out for us. Do we need to have that seconded before the reasons, or? Yeah, and then thank you.
So there were 4 reasons for refusals discussed, and the first of which was the need for purpose-built student accommodation had not been adequately demonstrated, and the weight to be attached to the delivery of purpose-built student accommodation, significant weight has been attached to this, and this complies with GNLP policy 5 on housing. Additionally, the lack of affordable housing provision, a significant weight has been attached to this. This complies with policy 5 of the GNRP. Third was DM9, that no overriding benefits of the proposed student accommodation, either in the release of the wider private sector housing, that outweigh the harm to the loss of the non-designated heritage asset, and significant weight has been attached to that. Less than substantial weight in the moderate to high range, less than substantial harm in the moderate to high range is not outweighed by the benefits of the scheme, and significant weight has been attached to that. And this complies with the MPPF.
Thank you. Have we a seconder for this? Councillor Young, thank you. Discussion, anyone? Anyone wish to say anything? Councillor Hampton?
Could I just, I was struggling to follow by the last couple of points. Could you just, I think from the, especially the, from less than substantial harm in what, sorry, I just got jumbled, didn't hear the full.
Apologies, that was me.
Not your fault.
So the final point was that the less than substantial harm in the moderate to high range to the heritage assets is not outweighed by the benefits of the scheme in accordance with the MPPF.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sturley?
Yes, just to follow up on that, the conservation officers have identified a number of buildings around the site that will be harmed in some way at different levels as a result of this new proposal.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, we'll move to the vote. And this is on the proposal which is heard in the reasons why.
Chair, I think Councillor Hampton had a hand up, didn't want you to miss it.
I did, and I was just to build a little bit on what I said a lot earlier about how I was balancing things, but in light of having these kind of firmly to consider, although I think there are some sort of, we've acknowledged that there will be some loss to the heritage, etc. But I still firmly believe that even if they're legitimate considerations, I don't think the balance has been got right with the 5-year land supply, the fact that this is a brownfield sustainable site, so I won't be supporting this motion.
Thank you. Ian?
Just one last appeal to members to use this vote to put forward the will of the committee. Thank you.
Well, not our fault. All those in favour of the proposal, please show.
For clarification, that's the proposal is to refuse for the reasons outlined. So voting in favour are Councillors Stuteley, Haynes and Young.
All those against, please show.
So that is Councillors Driver, Hampton, Maguire and Councillor Smith.
Abstentions.
And that is Councillor Mike Sands.
Thank you.
So the application therefore remains undetermined. It is up to members to put forward alternative proposals.
Okay, there's definitely one alternative proposal, and I will have one. Well, I will go back to the original proposal. I will, but Councillor Stuteley.
I'd like to propose that we defer the decision for a site visit and further consultation with our conservation officers on that site visit, so that we can listen to their concerns.
Thank you. Have we a second for that? Councillor Young, thank you. Anyone wish to discuss that? No, we'll put that to the vote then. Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. On those 2 points, I think the site is incredibly well known and members will have walked past it multiple times, so I'm not sure a site visit is really required. Also, the presentation before you today by officers has been in-depth and significant with many photographs. I'm not sure what value a site visit would add, and I think there's been significant debate about the heritage asset and the impact upon it. It's all set out in the report. I'm not sure there's further information that could be gleaned.
Okay. Well, it's been proposed and seconded, so we will move to the vote. All those in favour of a site visit and deferral, please show. That's it.
Voting in favour are Councillor Stuteley and Young. All those against?
All those against, please show.
That's Councillor Driver, Mike Sands, Councillor Hampton, Councillor Maguire, Councillor Smith.
Extensions. Thank you.
Haynes.
Okay, My proposal is we go back to the original proposal, which was on the papers, that is for approval. Have I been seconded for that? Couple of people second. Anyone wish to speak? Now, all those in favour, please show.
Yep, so that's councillors Driver, Mike Sands, councillor Hampton, councillor Maguire and councillor Smith,
All those against, please show.
councillor Stuteley, councillor Haynes and councillor Young.
Thank you. So it's been approved. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to the second item on the agenda. Yes, I know you did. Thank you.
Chair, I'll give my apologies. Leave the meeting.
Okay. What's that? You got to leave as well? Is Richard? Is he still out there? He was out there. There's only a few on us left now, but we are still for it. And we move on to our next item on the agenda, which is on Waring Road. And I'll ask Matthew to take through the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the application before us is planning application reference 22/00764/F. The application site is at 20 Waring Road in Norwich within the University Ward, and the proposal is for the construction of a 2-bed dwelling. The application site is situated within the University Ward. It is on the corner of the junction between Waring Road and Calthorpe Road, approximately 700 metres north of Earlham Road and the university area. The character of the area is primarily residential, characterised by terrace and semi-detached properties with varied but complementary design styles in both design and material. For the most part, Waring Road is formed of semi-detached properties, with the exception of numbers 21 to 25, where the end plot was also subdivided and a new dwelling approved under a 2006 planning reference. As shown on the images on the screen, there is no provision of off-street parking or driveways on properties, and instead vehicles utilise the large curbs for car parking. The proposed development site involves the subdivision of the side garden of 20 Waring Road, which is currently an underused garden space, which does host some existing structures on site, including sheds and stores as shown. Within the image, to the southwest of the site lies number 18 Calthorpe Road, a similar 2-storey semi-detached dwelling with a large side driveway accessed via Waring Road and a garden to the rear of the property. The next image shows the south elevation of number 20 Waring Road, which would become adjoined to the proposed dwelling and would involve the blocking in of the side window. This image is taken from the garden space of 20 Waring Road, with 18 Calthorpe Road pictured behind or to the right. To the foreground are further examples of the storage buildings and structures currently present on site. They would be removed as part of the application in order to facilitate the development. The boundary proposed would follow the side of the existing dwelling, adjoining the angled boundary fence to the east to form the new property boundary and garden space. So on my cursor, this would primarily follow this line where the rendered section of the building coming forward to join the garden fence as existing. The wider angle shows the relationship with the host property and its existing neighbour at number 18 Calthorpe Road. This also shows the change in ground level between the two properties, which is relevant to note due to the sloping topography of Waring Road, which slopes upwards toward the north. This change in elevation is further shown here, which shows a lower height boundary of the fence between the side garden of 20 Waring Road and the driveway of 18 Calthorpe Road. And the height difference is most notably noted in the following image, as shown here. So if you compare the two images, you see the fence height on this side versus the fence height on that side does show a good example of the height difference in the land. So here you can see the supporting wall at ground level, which supports the garden of 20 Warring Road at higher level, as well as the boundary fence separating the two properties. This also represents the extent of the side boundary of the proposed dwelling, which would follow the form and depth of the existing host property within the image. Whilst the land has not formally been surveyed, the image shows the change in land height between the two properties. Taken from the bottom right most brick to the second coping stone, the difference is approximately 11 brick courses, which equates to approximately 860 millimeters or 0.86 meters. As the garden continues to slope upwards from the boundary, the base of the property could be up to 1 meter higher than the adjacent driveway pictured. So the elevations show the proposed relationship between the new dwelling and the existing at number 20 Warring Road to the right. The elevation shows that the ridge height would be approximately 400 millimeters lower than that of the host property. The proposed materials would utilize a cream coloured rendered finish, coupled with grey roof tiles on both the main roof and ground floor lean-to. Windows would be fitted with white UPVC. This design choice is coherent with the overall character of the street scene and adjacent properties. As shown by the shaded section, an alleyway underneath the first floor level would provide access to the rear garden, allowing access for bins and bikes to be retrieved from the rear garden. Regarding the dimensions of the property, the width of the proposed would measure approximately 7.5 meters, with the height of the ridge 6.7 meters and the eaves height of 5.2 meters. No off-street vehicle parking is proposed as part of the development, and so occupiers would rely on existing capacity of on-street provision on Warring Road or surrounding streets. There are no controlled parking restrictions within this area, as indicated by the City Council parking zones map. The depth of the house at both first and ground floor level would measure 6.9 meters. However, both are offset at different points, with the total depth being approximately 8 meters. The ground floor is shown to extend further towards the front, utilising the lean-to roof form, whilst recessing at the rear to allow for a larger garden space with covered area underhanging the first floor, as shown by the proposed side elevation. The roof plan shows the relationship between the neighbour, matching the extent of the front and rear where eaves and ridges of the roof align, albeit at different heights as shown by the elevations previously. This section plan shows how this would translate at ground floor level, showing the increased usable floor space to the front and the recessed section to the rear to facilitate the patio, garden space, bin and cycle store. The plans also show the shared access through the rear garden to the existing number 20 through the alleyway. At the rear of the proposed building, the side elevation would be constructed approximately 300 mm from the side boundary with 18 Calthorpe Road, as shown where my cursor is. A maximum distance of 1 metre from the boundary to the front. At first floor level, due to the overhang, this would approximately be 200 millimeters to the rear from the boundary of aerial plan form. Regarding the rear garden boundary with the neighbour, the distance between the building and boundary is 3.6 meters at ground floor level and 2.4 meters at first floor level. The usable garden space is measured to provide approximately 210 square meters, plus the additional space for bins and cycle storage, which equates to approximately a further 8.6 square meters. It's acknowledged that this is a constrained site with a garden space smaller than average. However, it's considered that this is suitable for the size of the proposed two-bedroom dwelling, and the site is also within walkable distance to both the 20-acre wood to the northeast and Bowthorpe Marsh to the southwest for usable public outdoor space in addition. The first floor plans show windows on both the front and rear elevations of the building, serving 2 bedrooms and 1 ensuite room. This will introduce some level of overlooking between the proposed dwelling and adjacent properties. However, this is one that is not already present to some degree by virtue of the existing layout of properties in this medium density area. It is acknowledged there are constraints on the site. However, as Norwich within our policy area are unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, national planning policy does say that we should prioritise the provision of new dwellings to help meet the housing supply, unless there are significant reasons to justify a refusal. The location plan represents the proposed development site, front and rear garden space, and the relationship between the neighbouring properties. The application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions listed in the committee report and subject to the purchase of credits to resolve nutrient neutrality.
Thank you. Now, I was just looking at the plan. Barner, we have got a, which need to be read out by a member of the public. We'll call that first. Thank you.
Okay, so this is a statement on behalf of an objector. My name is Sally Brown, and I'm writing this on behalf of the residents of 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 and 21 Waring Road. This small residential road has more than its fair share of HMO properties, all run by absent landlords with typically 6 people living in what was built to be a 3-bedroom property. This causes enormous issues with parking, overflowing bins, overflowing bins, antisocial behaviour, and it feels not like a community anymore, just bedsit land. The landlord who owns number 20 also owns number 7 Waring Road, and this is the person who wants to build another buy-to-let property in the garden of number 20. This landlord is the worst of the bunch that we have encountered and does not look after the maintenance of his properties or take any responsibility for his tenants. I reported him last year for overcrowded, as he had 24 people in the 3-bed house who quickly all left once he had been found out. The house number 20 has all rooms except toilet and small kitchen converted into bedrooms, so his tenants have no social space except garden. And if he builds another house in that garden, that will be 2 houses on top of each other, crammed with people with no space inside or outside. The property 20 Waring Road is the most unkept in the whole road, with curtains in threads, rubbish in garden, and it is the only house on the road still having its asbestos roof, which, if disturbed during building a house adjoining, could prove a safety risk to residents. As a community, we opposed planning permission for this application before, and nothing has changed. The whole of West Earlham has to let boards up. There is already too many houses carved up to rent by the room. This area does not need or want another such property. Perhaps instead of allowing this matter to keep coming to planning, Norwich City Council could actually address the residents' issues with these HMO houses and with irresponsible landlords. So the few of us who actually call Waring Road home, it would be a nicer street like it used to be.
We also have the applicant here and he wishes to speak, and you have 3 minutes. Yeah, you need to push the button down the bottom, mate. Yep, brilliant. You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for me giving the opportunity for me to discuss about that. Yeah, okay, thank you. The residents in that area, they don't really like that student community overall. They try to, like oppose any kind of changes. There is a problem between like a old community and young generation, I think. Because the thing is like, we do have, I do have a regular students. Apparently, they don't like anything like even because most of the, the houses in that area, apart from mention the numbers, what they mentioned, are like students. So apparently, students they have that, their own, issues like antisocial behavior. Then for that, they try to reflect on my application. But probably, as you've seen that in the map, there is a small bit of, the land, when I bought this property, the house has the land as well along with that. And even like a agent, they said, we can, create the plot over there. So that's the reason, just we bought it. And also the thing is like, that it has more sufficient space to build the small house. But only reason they want to, because most of the houses, they have like quite few cars in their house. So they try to occupy the cars in front of that current house. So there was some issues before with the tenants, they were complaining me, but apparently like obviously I had to tell them this is like public road, so that they don't really like any new build in that area. For that reason, I think so they are refusing. So that's the main thing, what I could say. And even like because of that, just we change, we incorporated with that, the cycling, because most of the students who come there, they try to use the cycle. So we provide the provision of the cycle parking area. And even the asbestos thing, what they mentioned that because that even it was intact, there is no issue with that. That is completely intact. So I don't see the reason that is the issue. If any problem comes, I'm happy to consider to replace it, whatever it is. But at the moment, there is no issue. So that's the main thing. And the poor they did mention about the poor maintenance as well. Even like myself, I went there and then and tried to clean up quite a few times. But like because there's a big plot of land in the main road area, the people are there, they try to throw the stuff in. So if the the committee provide me the opportunity to build that some decent the house over there, so hopefully that area will be cleaned out and maintained in the proper way, I think, if you have the proper family over there. So that's my view. So
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to questions to the officer.
Just to confirm, the standard of where were concerns raised about standards of someone's landlord behaviour in that statement, that's not a material planning concern, is it?
No, that wouldn't be. So it's something we can't consider at this stage.
Can I ask a question? On that picture of the house, the new one being built. Keep going. Keep going. That one. Back. That one. What's going in the loft?
Those are roof lights that serve the bedrooms below. So there, if you go to the floor plans, the first floor plans. So you can see it there on that section actually, as well as on the plans on the right, you can see two roof lights that sit above each of the bedrooms, and on the section to the left, you can see that those roof lights would provide light to those bedrooms, and there's no floor space in the loft. It's too shallow.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, anyone? No discussion? The only thing I don't like about this, it's the amenity space. Out the back, what are we talking about? A couple of foot? I mean,
Yes, it's about 280 square meters.
It's a bit of a family house. I mean, you've got a lot of play area for the kiddies here.
No, it is acknowledged that it is a tight space.
Yeah. Councillor Haynes?
I share your concern about that, but I don't think that's a planning grounds again, is it? There's no planning. Well, it's amenity space, but I don't think that by itself is enough of a grounds to turn it down properly.
Yeah, just to confirm, external amenity space is a planning consideration, and there are planning policies that encourage provision of external amenity space. We don't have any policies which quantify the amount of external amenity space that's required, so it's a matter of judgment to determine whether the provision is acceptable.
Consent?
reminds me of at least two previous applications we had in years gone by, which were both refused on the grounds of over-intensification of the area in which they were, on those locations. And this strikes me as being very, very similar. We're looking at a constrained space in an area which is already sort of quite intensely sort of populated with houses and things, and it to me doesn't seem to be much different from those other places which we've turned down in the past.
Okay, that was a needy question. Question?
Sorry, question
Yeah.
before you call discussion. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the discussion now, if we want. Emma?
Actually, now I think of it, the first part might be a question. I might be thinking out loud, but this is my first civic year on planning committee, so I wasn't around for any previous applications, and I don't know exactly when they came, but I'm presuming it was probably before the local plan refresh, and the considerations now are probably have moved on and are a bit different. I'm a university ward councillor. I've had no interaction on this application, so looking at it as an open mind, but I fully understand and empathise with concerns generally students or kind of members of the community even have when you talk about kind of increasing the intensity of housing in the area, the association with students. But Ash has already kind of covered my initial question, which was that's not a material planning concern. As councillors and elsewhere in the council will have to deal with any potential issues, and it's by no means to say that there will be significant noise, antisocial behaviour, especially of a kind of build at this scale, but there's other mechanisms we'd have to pursue to deal with anything that arises there. I agree, it's far from ideal to be so constrained. There might be some parking impact, but it's unrestricted, and again with this size I can't imagine it putting a huge extra pressure in that area. But again, the presumption in favour of it providing extra housing units, I think on balance we'll probably have to support it today.
The gap between the existing and number 20, I don't think I have that measurement exactly, but going off the measured, I know that the gap between the left-hand side and the boundary is 1 metre there. So it looks like it's about 1 metre, if not maybe 1.2. But yeah, it's attached at first floor, so that's just at ground level. Yeah, no, it would be attached at first floor. So there would be terrace properties. It would become a terrace of 3. I've shown on these elevations here. So the grey shaded area here, that's essentially that alleyway. So it's attached at first floor level, but then leaves the alleyway open at ground floor for access to the garden.
The recommendation is to approve, and I'll move that. Have I got a second for that? Thank you. All those in favour, please show.
That's a recorded vote. So voting in favour are Councillor Driver, Councillor Hampton, Councillor Haynes and Councillor Smith.
Those against?
And that's Councillor Mike Sands.
Thank you. So that's been approved. Thank you. And that's the end of the meeting.